Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about Spike Lee's most recent film, The Five Bloods. But first, our podcast members are going to introduce themselves. My name is Peyton Hines. I am a junior psychology major, criminology minor from New York.
My name is Nyla Lee. I'm a junior journalism major, psychology minor from Brooklyn, New York.
My name is Cyan Fleming, psychology major, legal communications minor from New York.
Hello, my name is Mark Anthony Beckles, and I am a junior psychology major from Trinidad and Tobago, born and raised. I am currently on the swim team here at Howard University.
Without further ado, let's get this podcast started. So, Nyla, what is one psychological impact that you saw in The Five Bloods?
In terms of the psychological impact of Spike Lee's The Five Bloods, one of the most clear and consistent psychological themes surround the topic of PTSD, specifically in Black Vietnam vets who had to fight a war against injustice at home whilst being drafted into a war that most of them didn't quite understand, during which they witnessed and committed horrors that followed survivors well into their lives, even after their homecoming.
What examples in the film led you to this analysis?
Paul, our most prominent example of war-induced PTSD, makes his struggles most evident in his interactions with his son, David. The guilt that he carries from killing his close friend Norman, combined with the loss of his wife, seem to cause Paul to distance himself in his relationship with his son, as though he has no room for love in his life following the experiences with death. For an audience, his character may serve as a tool to invoke empathy toward older war vets who act a certain way based on their experiences.
Are there any other psychological impacts that you saw in the movie?
Interestingly enough, an important reference to the internal conflict that Black soldiers faced was the character based on Hanoi Hana, the Vietnamese talk show host who called into question the morality of the fact that, while Black people only made up 11% of the U.S. population at the time, they made up 32% of those fighting on the U.S. side. She even mentions that, while Black people in the U.S. were being tortured, killed, and jailed, especially during the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Black people in Vietnam were fighting for a cause that most of them did not truly believe in. Overall, I believe that the psychological and historical commentary alone make the movie worth the watch, but the set design, casting, costumes, etc. are also really great incentives to watch the movie.
Thank you, Nyla, for that intriguing commentary. Next, we have Peyton. So, Peyton, what do you think about the camera work of the film? I think the camera work of the film was phenomenal. Spike Lee used multiple techniques that got the audience to see exactly how each character felt. He used various close-up shots and extreme close-up shots where we could tell the characters' emotions through their eyes, facial expression, and overall body language. I also think that the angles he shot these scenes played a huge role on the impact the viewers had and the message he wanted to send out. In one scene where the Bloods heard over the radio that Martin Luther King was assassinated, the camera was in a wide shot because Mr. Lee wanted you to be able to see how their bodies reacted to that news, which we saw that they shot their guns in the air as a sign of honoring Dr. King. We also seen an over-the-shoulder shot when the Bloods are in the forest in Vietnam when they notice Vietnam soldiers. The over-the-shoulder shot was the best shot for this because the Bloods were in a line and you could see how in war, the leader of the troop would do a hand sign and the others would pass it along down the line. The shoulder shot gave the perfect view to the audience to see how it would feel if we were also a soldier, quote-unquote, hunting for our prey. So how do you feel about the imagery of the film? Well, I would say that the imagery is what worked best for him in this film. His use of videos and pictures from the actual Vietnam War helped to portray the actualities of the movie. I personally think he used these images and video clips to help the audience keep in mind that the situation in the movie did happen, and Black people were not treated kindly during that time. I would also like to think that he used them to try to evoke pathos into people watching. For example, white people who may have stumbled across this film could see the trauma and hardships that Black people went through during this time, especially how they used to force Black people on the most dangerous battlefields, hoping that they would die. One black soldier that Spike Lee mentioned and showed a picture of was Milton Olive, who was a black man who bravely jumped on a grenade to save his whole troop. He mentions these people to show that even though we black people fought and died for this country, in other countries, we were still not given rights back in our country. We were still treated like dogs in the streets, which I find that this was a very powerful message of the film, and hopefully other people picked up on this message also. How do you feel about the death scenes that happened? I actually found the camera work in the death scenes to be rather great, especially when Otis died by the mine he stepped on. The camera showed the perfect reactions from his partners, especially because Otis was just preaching to them about how they do not love each other after all they've been through. You could see on the remaining characters' faces that they felt sorry that before he exploded, they couldn't tell him how they loved him. The look of regret was burning on their face. Leroy's death scene also was one for the books because before he died, he saw Norman, who was the leader of the Bloods, who said he forgave him for accidentally shooting him, and he ended that flashback scene, by hugging him, which you could see in Leroy's eyes the hurt and he felt relief. You could see that in his eyes, relief that Norman forgave him, because that's what he'd been holding on to that for all his life. That's what mainly caused his PTSD. After that, it seems like Leroy got over his PTSD, and the camera showed a look of determination in his eyes right before he was killed. Thank you, Peyton. I am sure many of our listeners will want to see the amazing imagery for themselves. Cyan, how do you feel about Spike Lee's editing of the movie?
Honestly, the editing for the movie made me upset. It was so hard to get through for me, especially in the beginning. The beginning of the movie was the hardest part for me to get through because I'm very scatterbrained. And the way that the movie just kept flipping back and forth between different moments in time from the past and the present, which the past would be, represented by like more grainy type of film, and like they would change the landscape of the video. And the present would obviously be more full, widescreen, and much clearer in terms of quality of film. But the way that it would kind of flip back and forth between different events that happened in the past and that happened in the present, I was struggling to make the connections and kind of like understand what Spike Lee's message may have been. I did kind of understand the flipping back and forth though, because I feel like as a soldier, a lot of veterans come home and have to live with PTSD and, a lot of just underlying conditions that may not be so obvious to a normal citizen that's walking around. And I feel like the way that the film kind of flipped back and forth between those moments in time kind of gave me a sense of what it may or may not be like to be a veteran or to experience those war moments. I really think that each of the like cuts and the way that some characters had like monologues and certain solo scenes, it really gave me a sense of who the characters were as people, and even a sense of foreshadowing in some instances. Honestly, by the end of the movie, I was very confused and conflicted because I just didn't really understand or like know what to make of the movie. I didn't think it was bad, but I was just genuinely confused. But I do think that the editing was effective in the overall message of the movie.
Thank you, Cyan, for your views on Mr. Lee's editing. Now we're going to have Mark Anthony tell us about Mr. Lee's music choice and what that meant for the movie.
The music and instrumental scores in movies have always played a major part in whether I personally liked movies or not, so it was only right to me that I took this role on. For this role, I looked into the composition of the original motion picture score of The Five Bloods by Spike Lee. Like any movie, there is a variety of soundtracks from different artists that play their part in setting the tone of the movie. However, for this role, I specifically looked into the OST, which was composed by Terence Blanchard. Terence Blanchard is an African-American trumpeter and composer that has worked on more than 50 film scores since 1982. Terence is known for collaborating with Spike Lee frequently on his films, and with 5 Grammy Awards and 40 nominations, there's no reason why he shouldn't. From the jump, Terence brings his trumpeter expertise into motion throughout the course of the Five Bloods film with subtle tracks like Finding the Gold. He also shows his versatility in songs like Otis and Tien Have Dinner by implementing instruments like the Japanese shakuhachi into his work, which immediately supports some of the more hostile scenes throughout the movie. Terence does a good job of changing the pace with the addition of impactful drums and violins, along with melodic percussions. The track Rice Parties is a good example of this. Spike Lee also does a good job of adding some spice to the musical lineup of the movie by using soundtracks from big names like Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield, further supporting his ability to create great films.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our podcast about Spike Lee's most recent film, The Five Bloods. We hope our commentary encourages you to go watch this spectacular film for yourself. We hope you could join us for our next podcast. Once again, thank you and have a great day.